So this week we are discussing knowledge management and transfer. We'll start off the week talking about juggling tasks as college students and as professionals. We'll talk a little bit about the Dunning-Kruger effect and how it relates to knowledge, the knowledge transfer process, and then we will touch on our how-to project. So I think this is the point in the semester right before midterms where things start to get heavy in classes. Assignments start piling up. You are in maybe an anxious state when you're looking forward to the midterm exams or seeing some of those bigger projects on the horizon. So you are not alone. We at Texas Tech University have a lot of services in place in order to assist you, but I think a lot of the times we're left on our own, right? There's a lot of students that come right out of high school, and these are the first times that you've had to face some of these stresses alone without family, feeling isolated. And so what I like to say is anything worth doing is worth doing halfway. So let's say you're getting overwhelmed with classes and you just cannot face that sink full of dishes. Try putting everything in the dishwasher and running it 3 times. If it's worth doing halfway. So if you don't have workout or motivation, and instead of planning a whole hour a day where you have to get dressed, you have to go to a specific gym, try starting your day with stretches in bed or getting a gallon of water to do some arm exercises. Again, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing halfway. And if you're having trouble writing and you just don't have the motivation or the drive to get your writing done, try talking to text in your iPhone notes or on Microsoft Word, and then edit later with that content in an outline. Sometimes speaking out loud is easier than facing an empty screen. And when we talk about self-care, what we like to pretend self-care is a candle or a bathtub or a face mask or gaming. But what it actually is making sure our body has enough nutrients to process in the way it needs to, that we have enough sleep to face the day with energy and brain power. So self-care is honestly proactively creating a life that you don't have to actively escape from every day. So what are some things that you can implement in life that don't sound fun, but maybe if it's worth doing, it's worth doing halfway. Maybe we don't meal plan the week every week, but some days we choose a meal that has a little bit higher nutrition than others right before a big test. So, like I said, if it's worth doing, we should at least make an attempt, even if it's not fully 100%. And I think a good sense of something that's been told to me before is when we're juggling tasks, we have to identify which tasks are rubber and which ones are glass. Will it shatter if we drop the ball on this task? Or can it bounce back and wait a day if we're truly overwhelmed and need to focus on other things? So some glass balls is, maybe if you have daily medication, that's really important for you to take daily to be your best self. If you have kids, picking them up for school is something that you probably can't put off until later. And then, unfortunately, in a lot of our classes, those assignment deadlines, especially in a class like this who may grade a little tougher, those are our glass balls. Some of those rubber tasks is, maybe cleaning and laundry. Maybe instead of spending an hour to wash those dishes, we do pop them in the dishwasher and run it 3 times while we're doing assignments. Some extra credit assignments may seem a little bit more fun. But again, those are some that we can often put off before we finish our final ones and have time for it. And maybe plans with a friend. I know in a time of isolation that can be a form of self-care, so if that's something that you absolutely need to do in terms of your mental health, I think go for it, but I'm often guilty of never being able to say no, and I have to know that meetup with a friend can wait until after my big assignment's done, and then I don't have to stress about it when we meet. Knowledge in general is facts, information, and skills acquired by a person through experience or education. And to me, when people say common knowledge, I think that's an unfair phrase and limits the complexity of our experiences here as humans. Your knowledge and my knowledge, despite having lived in similar areas, is very different, let alone someone who may have grown up in Norway or Canada. Their knowledge and their common experiences in education is much different than the ones that you and I live in, maybe between you and I in separate cities. And so it's also theoretical or practical understanding of a subject. So it's often in your short-term memory if you can remember it enough for an exam, and it's your long-term memory if someone in your class asks you a question and you can answer it. That's when it truly becomes knowledge. There's a phrase, and I couldn't identify exactly if the source is correct, but the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. Okay, so let's dive into that. What does it mean, knowing you know nothing? Well, a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing according to the Dunning-Kruger effect. And we'll talk about how the top right graph is a little bit different than the bottom right graph. The top right came from Dunning-Kruger, and the bottom right came from a blog that criticized Dunning-Kruger. So we'll talk about both sides of this. But it bases down to, it's not implying that people always overestimate their knowledge or competence, but that it matters in the domain in which they evaluate themselves, as well as having a minimal threshold of knowledge, theory, or experience. So if we look at this graph, and we'll come back to these. Let's pull up the big graph. So if you can see at the bottom left, you say, what's this? And when you're starting out, you say, oh, okay, data science looks super easy. But as soon as we hit that threshold of, oh, the complexities of the subject and topic are way more than I was expecting, then we realize we don't know as much as we thought we did, right? There's way more of the knowledge base than we are getting exposed to. So we think, man, there's more to this than I thought. This is too complex. And the more and more that we learn about it, remember, we're still under that threshold of what we were at the very beginning. Oh, it looks really easy. I understand it. The more we learn, we're still way under that level of confidence that we started with. And then eventually we can work our way back up, but you see the amount of competence it takes to develop that confidence. So going back, there's a minimal threshold of knowledge, and you talk about the domain in which they evaluate themselves. If I'm looking at my golf skill based on my high school team, rather than playing golf with Tiger Woods, the domain and the people around you is very important when you are estimating that competence or that confidence. So with that first level, before that threshold, there's a false belief they are knowledgeable or competent. But we always know that there's other things that play roles, including motivational biases and some other factors in our environment. So this is from a blog that was criticizing the Dunning-Kruger effect. And they said that we all basically have the same amount of perceived ability, regardless of the amount of competence that we have. So it's not telling much of a different story of we just feel more competent at the beginning of our knowledge base than we do at the end of it. But it's just another look at a similar set of data. They believe this is what the true chart looks like instead of this. But I think that the sentiment is the same. There's a minimal threshold of knowledge that begins our journey into being an expert in a topic. So when we manage knowledge, we're looking at this from a systematic approach. Okay, not from managing our budget or another thing, but creating, sharing, and using knowledge and information as a system. So how do we get the most information out of it? Who needs access to it? And who's interested? How do those people normally receive their information? And so for this, maybe we're talking about a business and there is a number of things that new employees need to know. We need to make sure that information is organized, visible, and accessible in order to create and share it within a system. So this is what knowledge management is not. It's not technology, but technology can be used as a tool. It's not a directive, right? It's not an order from your boss at a job, but knowledge management may begin with a direct order and lead to a systematic approach of knowledge management. And it's not even really a business strategy, although it could be part of a business strategy. So an example I like to use of knowledge management is Dry Dictionary. There is a instructor here named Lap Shu, and he is from a community in Vietnam, and he is the sole source of their language's dictionary right now. So a dictionary is a type of systematic use of knowledge that's easy and accessible, because before now it's been a verbal language, just oral. So categories of knowledge management can be like a community of practices or traditions, a document management system like the dictionary or Dropbox, computer-supported collaborative work like Microsoft Teams, if y'all have been introduced to that, or information repositories such as Wikipedia. So if we were talking about the dictionary that Mr. Lap Shu made, it would include the language into Google Translate when people are trying to find things up. That would be a technology tool, right? But it wouldn't be a knowledge management. The directive may have been, man, we need to translate these birth certificates from an oral language, or if it's barely written, or maybe into the language so that mothers can understand. But a business strategy might be, man, we need to really increase sales in these Vietnamese communities, and maybe we add more local languages to our product, and so that it's more accessible to these communities. But that's a business strategy, directive, and technology. So it's not the systematic approach, but they're tools behind these driving factors. Why does it matter? Business complexity. Employees might need information quickly from other departments, especially large organizations. I think of Textron Aviation in Wichita, Kansas, had a government special missions division. They had a parts division. They had a repair division. Industrial engineering, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering. And if you need information quickly from other departments, then a knowledge management system that you can easily access the data you need without having to search for it simplifies that business model and makes it easier to get things done. Increasing speed demands. We have, and I'm guilty of it, very short attention spans. And so if we can't find the answer in a few moments on Google, sometimes we give up. And so those knowledge management systems need to be visible, accessible, and able to be used by all very quickly. And then there's employee turnover. So you think of a restaurant that has new employees all the time. What is the best way to sort and store information to quickly train a new employee and give them access to that information after, so they can go back and check it out if they need to? So there is tacit knowledge, which is experience and practice. These are our values, our judgments, and our preferences. It's difficult to transfer these things through, let's say, Microsoft Teams, right? These are deep and complex. This is people's experiences and practices and what they know, their knowledge. And I think of this video that came out a while ago. It says, you can tell it's an aspen tree because of the way it is. I'm not going to be able to tell it's an aspen tree, but this guy with his experience and his practice and his knowledge knows. So how do we transfer that to me? That's called explicit knowledge. So this is easily recorded, coded, and stored. It's organized for the explicit use of others. So this is transferable information. Maybe we're talking about an application of a product called BioVan to an aspen tree. So it shows us where it needs to go, how far the holes in the soil need to go apart, how much of the product needs to go into this. So this is transferable knowledge. So the goal is to transfer tacit to explicit. So how do we capture what we know and make it organized, visible, and accessible? Peanut butter and jelly sandwich is one of my favorite informational processes. So we will look at this a lot in some of our examples, just so we can keep it consistent. So, giving clear directions is important. Remember that very first week when we talked about Shannon-Weaver model of communication, encoding messages versus decoding them. So, important when we're creating that tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge of it's one item at a time. We're not overwhelming our audience. We're using action verbs so they know that they have a task to do and how to do that. But we break down those complicated tasks so we're not overwhelming them, and we are truly simplifying complex tasks to single item action tasks. So let's think about this. What do you, from your experiences, your years of life lived, the places that you've been, the things that you've seen, and the tasks that you've accomplished, what do you know? And what can you share with others, taking that tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge? So, when we're talking about this upcoming how-to project, which is what we've been discussing, we need to remember to explain the brain before the body. So, before we grab the sheet to fold it in half, remember, we're searching for the corner of the sewing seam. So put your thumbs on either edge of that sewing seam and fold your arms together until they touch. So explaining that brain, remember, this is what we're searching for before giving them those action terms. Clarity is more important than word count always. The least amount of words, the greatest the clarity. Now, for this project, I do have time limits set on the project, but I'm asking you to pick a skill or a task or an informational set of knowledge to show us that's a little bit more complicated than just us Googling it. So it's going to take a little bit more time, but we still need to prioritize clarity over word count. And the last is use collaborative language so that we're working together rather than preaching. Next, we take the leather section and we dab it with the sponge. Or, this is where things can get tricky, but we've got this. That type of language included in a podcast or a video often connects the user to you in your actions. So some examples, if I had to do this project, what would I do? I might give the steps of how to create a proper charcuterie board, or the rules of mixed doubles tennis based on the court, how to properly fold a fitted sheet, something I learned as of recent. Maybe government business etiquette in Egypt. Like I worked with one of my previous jobs, I have a set of knowledge on that, so I can share that. It may not be a step-by-step 1 through 10 example, but it's descriptive. How to prepare a leather wallet to be told, which is an example that we're seeing on the left. I'll put this video in your watch folder. Preparing a zoo exhibit for a photo shoot. Taking a perfect snowy weather DSLR photo. Or the basic rules of HTML and CSS coding. So these are lived experiences. This is tacit knowledge that I have, that if I had to do this project, if I had to create a podcast or create a video, this is some of the examples that I may try to convert into explicit knowledge so that y'all would be knowledgeable and able to do the task that I'm describing. So remember, this week, I'll put that video in your watch folder in virtual. But this week, we have the week 6 quiz due by Saturday at 11:59 p.m. We do have that cover letter due this Saturday. It's going to be the same subject as the job that you chose for your resume, and I want those headers to match. So go back and make sure you look at the rubric before you do the project. You have your read, watch, do folders, which for this virtual online class includes that discussion post. So if you are going virtual this week, make sure you go and complete the discussion post by Saturday at midnight. And then the how-to projects due next week at midnight, but I want you to get a chance to think ahead. And if you had any questions or concerns, you could contact me and we could work it out. Now, we do have a very thorough punctuation lesson this week. And so these lessons are in your virtual folder. They're also in read folder. I wanted to make sure that if you were virtual, you would see it in both places. These are some of the subjects that we're looking at in terms of punctuation. This is probably going to be the majority of your midterm. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the midterm next week, but I want you to really look over this lesson. This quiz this week is a pretty good indicator of your level of confidence and competence, like we talked about, of grammar for the upcoming midterm. So please check it out online, and if you have any questions or concerns about any of these quizzes or assignments, you know my email, you know where to find me, and you know how to create a Zoom. I will see you next week.